She was sitting on my couch like it belonged to her. If you've ever trusted someone who crossed a line you clearly set, stay with this story, because what unfolds next is something no one sees coming. I stopped in the doorway, grocery bags cutting into my fingers, and didn't say a word. Calm came first. It always did. My heart sped up, but my face stayed still because years ago I learned that quiet gives you time to think. And I needed time now. It was Tuesday, just after 4 in the afternoon. The clock above my stove clicked louder than usual. Outside, a lawn mower droned somewhere down the block. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something sweeter I didn't recognize. That was the first wrong thing. I never bought scented candles. She looked up when she heard the bags rustle. Not startled. Not embarrassed. Comfortable. My younger sister smiled like I was late, not like she'd crossed a line I'd drawn in ink. "Oh," she said, stretching the word. "You're home early." I set the bags down slowly, one by one, lining them up like I meant to unpack. My keys were still in my hand. I noticed that before I noticed her coat draped over my chair. I always noticed keys. Old habits don't fade at 68. "I didn't know you were coming," I said. My voice sounded steady even to me. "Mom said it was fine," she replied too quickly. Like she'd rehearsed it. She patted the cushion beside her. "I'll just be here a little while." The second wrong thing was the coffee mug on the table. My mug. The one with the chipped handle. It was half full and still warm. I hadn't had coffee since morning. I glanced toward the hallway. My bedroom door was open. I always closed it. "You used the spare key," I said, not asking. He shrugged. "Mom gave it to me. You weren't answering your phone." That was when I felt it, low and tight in my stomach. Not anger. Something colder. I remembered suddenly that I'd changed one small thing in the house last month. Something she didn't know about. I kept my eyes on her face and said nothing. She crossed her legs and leaned back. The couch creaked under her weight, familiar and wrong at the same time. This couch had held my husband through chemo. It had held me through nights when sleep wouldn't come. Watching her sink into it felt like a violation I couldn't name yet. I walked to the kitchen and rinsed my hands at the sink just to give myself movement. The water was too loud. I turned it down. My reflection in the window looked older than it had that morning. From the living room she called out, "You don't mind, right? It's just for a few days." A few days had ruined things before. I dried my hands carefully and checked the drawer beneath the counter. It was slightly open. I never left it like that. Inside, the envelope where I kept emergency cash sat crooked. I closed the drawer without touching anything else. When I came back, she was scrolling on her phone, shoes kicked off, feet tucked under her like she planned to stay. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my ears now. "You should have asked me," I said. She laughed softly. "You're being dramatic. It's family." Family had always been her answer. Family when she needed money. Family when she needed a place to land. Never family when I needed boundaries. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap. Sitting made it real. Made it clear I wasn't leaving the room. She finally looked up, studying my face, maybe noticing something had shifted. "You didn't have permission to be here," I said. Her smile faded just a little. "Don't do this," she said. "Not today." She followed my eyes to the hallway and then back to the kitchen, and for a moment she looked almost nervous. Almost. I noticed how she kept glancing toward the front door, how her phone never left her hand. Little tells she'd had since we were girls. I wondered what she'd already touched. What she'd already decided was hers. The house felt smaller with her in it, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I thought of the neighbor who always watched from her porch, of the security light I'd replaced last winter, of the small notebook tucked in my purse. I took a slow breath, feeling the ache in my knees, the steadiness in my spine. I had lived through worse than this. And she still didn't know what I knew. The silence stretched, daring one of us to speak first. And I was the one who stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten her. I simply walked past her, picked up my phone from the counter, and stepped into the hallway where my hands finally started to shake. I closed the door to my bedroom behind me and leaned against it, breathing slowly, pressing the cool wood into my back. When I dialed, my voice surprised me. Calm, clear. Like I was reporting a broken appliance, not my own sister. I explained that someone was in my home without permission. I gave my address. I answered questions. I left nothing out and added nothing extra. From the living room I could hear her laughing softly, still confident. That sound stayed with me. It hardened something inside my chest. The waiting felt longer than it was. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the clock tick, the hum of the refrigerator, the familiar house sounds that now felt unsettled. I noticed the window was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it that morning. The knock came sharp and official. 2 officers. One older, one young enough to be my grandson. They spoke kindly to me, asked me to confirm my name, my age, my request. I nodded, hands folded, back straight. She argued. He always did. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said our mother approved. The officers listened, then looked to me. I said one sentence. She doesn't live here and I want her to leave. That was enough. Watching them escort her out felt unreal. She kept looking back at me, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. At the door she hissed my name like a warning. I didn't respond. When the door finally closed, the house exhaled. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the echo of footsteps fade. My knees ached. My mouth tasted like metal. The officers returned to ask if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. Not loudly. Not proudly. Just firmly. They wrote things down while I answered questions, dates and details I'd quietly memorized without realizing it. After they left, the phone started ringing. Family. Friends of family. Voices layered with concern and judgment. I didn't answer most of them. I turned the ringer off and made tea instead, hands steady again. I checked my purse. My wallet felt lighter. I didn't count yet. I didn't need to. I already knew something was missing. Later that evening my mother called. Her voice was strained, confused, defensive. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I told her I needed time. Real time. She didn't like that answer. When night came, I walked through each room slowly. I locked windows. I checked drawers. I noticed small changes that told a bigger story. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough. I found a receipt in the trash that wasn't mine. Gas station. Late afternoon. The time stamped while I was at the store. I folded it and put it in my pocket without comment. In the bathroom, the medicine cabinet sat slightly ajar. My reflection looked pale, older than usual, but steady. I reminded myself to breathe. Before bed, I wrote everything down in a small notebook I kept from years ago. Times. Words. Details. Writing steadied me. Morning light came through the curtains too early. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp. I made coffee and finally opened my wallet. The amount missing was small enough to excuse if I wanted to. Large enough to matter if I didn't. I closed the wallet and set it beside the notebook. I sat at the table longer than necessary, staring at the grain in the wood, remembering other moments when I had ignored my instincts to keep peace. Each memory lined up neatly now, no longer confusing, no longer blurred by guilt or habit. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or keys. It was about control, about who decided what I was allowed to endure. That understanding settled quietly, but it stayed. I stood and checked the front door once more, pressing my palm against the lock until I felt certain. The house felt different now, watchful, like it was waiting with me. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires crunching on gravel. I watched from the window longer than necessary, wondering if she was already telling her version. I wasn't angry. I was alert. And that felt far more dangerous. I sat in the quiet, listening to my own breathing, understanding that once boundaries are crossed, they must be rebuilt stronger than before again. I slept poorly, but I slept. And when I woke up, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. I felt it before I saw it, that quiet wrongness in the house that sat heavy on my chest. The air felt disturbed, like someone had moved through it without permission. I stood still in the hallway, listening, my hand resting on the wall to steady myself. The front door was locked. That was the first thing I checked. The chain hung where it should. But the living room looked different. Not messy. Just altered. A lamp angled slightly toward the couch. The curtains parted an inch wider than I left them. Small things easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. I walked farther in, my slippers whispering against the floor. My stomach tightened when I saw the side table drawer pulled out just enough to notice. Inside, the notebook I'd written in the night before was gone. My heart didn't race. It dropped. I stood there longer than I should have, forcing myself to breathe. I hadn't imagined this. Someone had been inside again. I felt foolish for the brief relief I'd allowed myself after the police left the day before. I checked the windows next. The kitchen one was unlocked, the latch turned the wrong way. I remembered checking it with my own hands. That memory was sharp, undeniable. I sat down slowly, the chair cool beneath my legs. My hands felt numb now. Not fear. Focus. The kind that comes when something finally makes sense. The phone rang. My sister's name lit up the screen, bold and unapologetic. I didn't answer. It rang again, then stopped. A message followed, short and casual, like nothing had happened. I deleted it without opening it. Instead, I called the bank. The woman on the line spoke gently, asking questions, confirming dates. I answered each one carefully, glancing at the clock, grounding myself in facts. There had been a withdrawal overnight. Small. Familiar. The kind that wouldn't trigger alarms. I thanked her and hung up, my throat dry. My neighbor knocked mid-morning. She held a package that wasn't hers, her eyes darting past me into the house. "I thought I saw someone earlier," she said slowly. Didn't want to assume. I told her no, but my voice shook just enough to make her frown. She described a car parked too close to my driveway. How long it stayed. How it left. I listened without interrupting, committing every detail to memory. After she left, I changed my shoes and grabbed my purse. I needed movement. I drove to the building manager's office, hands tight on the steering wheel. The radio played softly, a voice talking about weather I barely heard. He listened, nodding, his expression serious. He promised to review the cameras near the back lot. I noticed how his tone shifted when I mentioned the police visit. That mattered. Back home, I checked the closet. One folder was missing. Not important to anyone else. Important to me. It held copies, not originals, but the intention behind taking it sat heavy in my chest. I realized then she wasn't panicking. She was searching. That afternoon I didn't clean. I didn't rest. I documented. Photos. Notes. Times. I wore my reading glasses until my temples ached. Every small detail went into the notebook I now kept on the kitchen counter in plain sight. When my mother called, I answered. Her voice trembled, full of confusion and exhaustion. I told her someone had been back inside my house. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain everything. I just stated facts. Silence followed, long and complicated. Before evening, I changed the locks. The locksmith worked quietly, respectful, asking no unnecessary questions. The sound of metal clicking into place felt grounding, final in a way I needed. As he left, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one sharper. Defensive. I read it this time, then saved it. I sat alone as dusk settled, the house wrapped in shadows and familiar creaks. I felt tired but clearer than I had in years. Something had shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. She had crossed another line. And this time I wasn't just protecting myself. I was preparing. I turned on the porch light and closed the curtains, the house finally feeling like it was on my side again. I stopped bracing myself and started speaking plainly. I didn't call people to persuade them. I called to inform them. That difference mattered more than I expected. My voice stayed level, almost boring as I explained what had happened, what I'd seen, and what I could prove. I didn't decorate the story. I didn't soften it either. The first call was to my sister's landlord. I introduced myself, gave my name, and explained why she might be hearing from him soon. He asked careful questions. I answered them slowly, choosing words that could stand on their own. When I mentioned police reports, his tone changed. Not hostile. Alert. Next came my bank branch. I went in person early enough that the lobby still smelled like floor cleaner. The teller recognized me. I asked to speak privately. Inside a small office, I laid out dates, amounts, and a pattern that no longer felt accidental. The manager listened without interrupting, then asked for copies. Already had them. Word didn't spread loudly. It spread correctly. I didn't defend myself to family. I sent one message, short and factual, to a group thread I rarely used. I listed what had occurred, what I'd reported, and what I expected next. I said I wouldn't discuss it further. My phone stayed quiet afterward, which told me more than replies ever could. That afternoon, a woman from the building association called. She said my name carefully, like it mattered. She asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement. I said yes. She thanked me twice. When we hung up, my hands were trembling, but not from fear. I took a walk to settle myself, the late light warm on my shoulders. Neighbors nodded. Someone asked how I was doing. I said, managing, and meant it. The street felt wider than it had in days. Back home, I organized papers on the dining table, stacking them neatly. Reports. Receipts. Notes. I noticed how steady my movements were now. Anger had always made me clumsy. This felt different. Clean. Intentional. My mother called again in the evening. Her voice was quieter this time. She asked questions instead of giving advice. I answered what I could and stopped where I needed to. When she suggested I let things calm down, I told her the truth had already begun doing that work. She didn't argue. Later my sister sent a long message. Accusations wrapped in hurt. I read it once, saved it, and didn't respond. I didn't need to correct her version anymore. Other people were already noticing the gaps. A small thing happened that night that stayed with me. The neighbor who'd knocked earlier left a note by my door, offering to watch my place if needed. No gossip. No judgment. Just quiet support. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Before bed, I reviewed everything one last time, checking names and dates. I caught a detail I'd missed before, something minor but telling. I circled it lightly, not ready to use it yet. As I turned off the lights, the house settled around me, familiar and steady. I realized I wasn't rehearsing conversations anymore. I wasn't imagining confrontations. The truth was moving on its own now, carried by documents and calm voices. I lay awake listening to the night sounds, not tense, just aware. Somewhere stories were adjusting to facts. Doors were closing softly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. The next morning, I met with a legal aid counselor recommended by the bank. The office was modest, the chairs worn, the air humming softly. She didn't dramatize anything. She listened, nodded, and explained options in plain language. Hearing my situation reflected back to me without emotion made it feel real in a new way. I signed forms slowly, asking questions when I needed to. Each signature felt like placing weight on solid ground. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't hiding. I was standing where I could be seen. When I stepped back outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that promises rain but holds it back. I took a deep breath and noticed how my shoulders had dropped. I spent the rest of the day doing ordinary things. Laundry. Soup on the stove. Sorting mail. Ordinary tasks felt grounding, like proof that my life wasn't defined by one person's choices. That night, as rain finally tapped the windows, I wrote one last note in my notebook. Not evidence. A reminder. I wrote that I had chosen clarity over chaos, and that choice was already changing the air around me. I slept with the notebook nearby, not for fear, but because intention felt lighter when kept within reach that night. Morning came softly. Rain lingered on the windows, turning the street into a blur of gray and silver. I made coffee and sat at the table, notebook closed, hands wrapped around the mug. I wasn't anxious anymore. I was ready. The call came just after 9. The legal aid counselor spoke calmly, confirming what I'd suspected but hadn't allowed myself to say out loud yet. The documents I'd gathered, the messages I'd saved, the pattern of access and withdrawal all pointed in one direction. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't desperation. It was deliberate. What surprised me wasn't the confirmation. It was the relief. Later that afternoon, my sister asked to meet. Neutral ground, she said. Her voice was brittle, stripped of confidence. I agreed, not because I owed her anything but because I wanted to look her in the eye without anger clouding the moment. We met at a small cafe near the library. The smell of baked bread filled the room. She arrived late, scanning for exits before she saw me. She sat stiffly, hands wrapped around a cup she didn't drink from. "They're saying things," she began. I nodded. "They're reading things." She frowned, confused. I slid a folder across the table. Copies only. Dates. Times. Her name appearing too often to dismiss. Her face changed as she flipped through the pages, color draining, posture shrinking. "You planned this," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "I prepared for it." He tried to explain. "Old grievances. Entitlement dressed up as hurt." I listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence felt heavy but clean. "I didn't destroy your life," I said. "I stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices." Her eyes filled, but there was no apology. Just fear of what came next. I stood before she could say more. "I'm done," I said. "This is where I step away." I left cash for my coffee and walked out into the damp afternoon, heart steady, steps light. Things resolved quickly after that. The landlord made decisions. The bank finalized actions. The building association updated records. I answered questions when asked and stayed quiet when silence served better. I didn't chase justice. I let it arrive. My mother came by one evening, carrying a pie neither of us would eat much of. We sat at the table speaking honestly for the first time in years. She admitted what she hadn't wanted to see. I accepted what she could give. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Weeks passed. The house settled back into itself. I rearranged furniture. Donated old clothes. Fixed the loose hinge on the back door. Each small act felt like reclaiming space, both physical and emotional. One afternoon I took the notebook outside and sat on the porch. I read the first entry written with shaking hands and the last written with certainty. I closed it and placed it in a drawer, not hidden, just finished. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. The final letter arrived quietly. Polite. Clear. I read it once, then folded it carefully. The matter was concluded. Boundaries restored. Accountability acknowledged. That evening I turned on every light in the house, not because I needed them but because I could. Warm light filled corners that had held tension for too long. I cooked dinner slowly, music low, windows cracked open to the cool air. As I ate, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't looked like yelling or humiliation. It had looked like clarity. Like choosing myself without apology. Like refusing to carry someone else's chaos simply because I always had. I washed my dishes and stood at the sink watching water run clear. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one, steady and reliable. I was no longer bracing. I was living. Later, as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Older, yes. Softer in some places. Stronger where it mattered. I smiled not because I'd won but because I was free. And that was everything. If this story made you feel understood, seen, or stronger in your own choices, subscribe for more true, emotional stories about betrayal, boundaries, and quiet revenge that speaks louder than anger.